My favourite home computer of all time has to be the Commodore Amiga. Back in the day, the Amiga was an incredible machine, capable of some incredible games. But it's fair to say that its arcade conversions were substandard, at least for the most part. And there are a few reasons for this. Notably, most Amiga ports came from the Atari ST, and this meant that many of the games didn't take advantage of the Amiga's custom hardware, and the results were not very good. Usually it would mean that the games would not scroll smoothly, poor frame rates, as well as questionable graphics and sound, and overall it was a bit of a mess, especially when we put it up against the Sharp X68000 or even the Sega Genesis. The Amiga was capable of so much more, but unfortunately when we're talking about arcade conversions, it never quite got there. But all is not lost. In the right hands, the Amiga is capable of some incredible things, and none more so than the 4 games that we're going to take a look at today on the channel. These 4 releases are from Giza Games, and they are Bomb Jack Beer Edition, Rygar AGA, Turbo Sprint, and Devil's Temple. These are homebrew versions of classic arcade games that either never made it to the Amiga commercially or simply wasn't a good conversion. These games were developed by Graham Cowie, who's been working on bringing classic arcade games to the Amiga since 2014, and when his latest release, known as Devil's Temple, released earlier this year for the Amiga, I had to pick these games up. Now, I'm a big fan of physical products, as you guys know, and a big box release of an Amiga game in 2022 is pretty much a unicorn these days. So let's go ahead and check out 4 Amiga games that have seen releases over the last couple of years that have a physical release that, in my opinion, are some of the best pieces of work that I've seen on the Amiga in a very, very long time. First up is Bomb Jack Beer Edition. It's called Beer Edition due to the fact that this is a homebrew port, and this is Giza Games' first release. One really great thing about these games are physical versions are available, and with Bomb Jack you get a nice big box, the game on a single floppy disk, and this is playable on any Amiga with at least 1 MB of RAM and an instruction card. If you don't like physical games and just want to download and play with it, Bomb Jack Beer Edition is available as a free digital download from Giza Games' itch.io page, and I'll leave a link to that in the description below. Bomb Jack is an arcade game originally from 1984, which could be considered a Pac-Man clone of sorts. The main character, Bomb Jack, must fly and float in the air and collect all the red bombs on screen. Once all the bombs are collected, the player will then move on to the next stage. There are enemies on screen that want to kill Bomb Jack, but collect enough red bombs in a sequence and a circular P will appear and allow Bomb Jack to collect them without dying. The original conversion released in 1988 by Elite Systems for the Amiga, and it's fair to say it's not very good. While it retains the core gameplay, it's sluggish and it runs at 25 frames per second. The music is also completely different from the arcade, and overall, the Amiga should be capable of so much better. And that's where Bomb Jack Beer Edition comes in. This is the latest 2022 update of Giza Games' original 2018 release that is about as arcade perfect as you can get. Right from the intro screen, the graphics and music is fantastic, and Bomb Jack Beer Edition sits right next to the arcade version as one of the best. Take a look for yourself. $4.5 billion years has passed since Earth's creation. Many dominators have ruled in all their glory, but time was their greatest enemy and it defeated the rain, and now a new dominator's reign begins. Rygar AGA is a homebrew conversion of Rygar, the arcade game released by Tecmo in 1986. It's a side-scrolling platformer where you play the role of the legendary warrior and battle through 30 individual stages to defeat the monsters of Argol. Rygar never came out for the Amiga, which is a little puzzling because it did come to 8-bit micros such as the Commodore 64 and the Sega Master System. On the 16-bit systems, only the Sharp X68000 received a port. It's unknown as to why this is. Perhaps it was due to the Amiga's limitations of its color palette, and a capable team could have pulled this off, but in the end, it never saw a release. That is until 2020 when Giza Games released Rygar AGA. And it's a quality conversion. This game runs exclusively on AGA chipset Amigas such as the A1200, A4000 and CD32. This is because it requires that extra processing power as well as the color palettes to be as faithful as possible to the arcade. It also makes use of the entire amount of 2 megabytes of chip memory available on AGA Amigas to store its graphics and sound data. And in my opinion, this was the right call by Giza Games, as a standard Amiga version would have been much too ambitious. Now, when we compare the Amiga version to the arcade, you can see it's close, really close, and that's one thing that I love about this version. But another great thing is the sound. It's very faithful to the arcade, and this is interesting because the Amiga has no FM sound chip at all. So the music tracks that you're hearing in the game are using sampled instruments to effectively recreate the arcade sound. This is brilliant stuff. Now, the physical version of the game, you get the same size and same big box product as the Bombjack Beer Edition. In fact, all of these games maintain consistency, featuring the same size big box. Now, inside the box, you get a single floppy disk with the game and of course an instruction manual on how to play the game. Once again, Rygar AGA is available as a free digital download for those that want to check it out. And I might add that Graham has also bundled source code for Rygar AGA and Bombjack Beer Edition, so if you want to take a close look and see how things are done, you can simply download it and take a look for yourself. Now, some folks that are familiar with the Amiga may not be aware that the Amiga actually supports 2 fire buttons, and Rygar AGA takes advantage of this, so you can have one button to shoot and the other button to jump. This is quite beneficial, as many Amiga games back in the day would require you to press up to jump, and up to jump on the joystick doesn't really feel natural, especially to those people who aren't used to it. So having a separate fire button for jumping is a welcome addition. Very cool stuff. Now, the next game on this list is Turbo Sprint, and simply put, this is a port of Atari's Super Sprint, a top-down racing game from 1986. In the arcade, the cabinet is legendary, with 3 steering wheels and up to 3 players can play simultaneously on 8 tracks. It's a fun top-down racing game that has a lot of replay value. And this Amiga version, known as Turbo Sprint, is quite impressive. Super Sprint would never see an Amiga port because back in the day it was simply because it was developed by Atari, and due to the battle going on with Atari ST, it never saw an Amiga version. However, on the ST it did receive a port, and it's pretty decent, but Turbo Sprint goes above and beyond. Like Rygar AGA, it only runs on AGA capable Amigas, and this is because the game takes full advantage of the Amiga's high-res interlace mode for its graphics. Now, I should mention that almost no games use this mode simply because of the bandwidth limitations of the Amiga to move data into chip memory, the memory that stores both graphics and audio data. Even with the Blitter and DMA, high-res modes are simply not used for games for the most part. Turbo Sprint, however, is a good candidate for high-res interlace modes. First of all, it's much more faithful to the Atari original arcade version, which uses a medium-res 25 kHz mode with a resolution of 512 by 384. And second, because the game is top-down with no scrolling at all Giza Games needed to do was ensure that the car movement and small animations were handled. This, in my opinion, would be the right move, and it makes this version feel as close to the arcade as you can get. Of course, the music once again is fantastic, and as a bonus it features up to 4 plays simultaneously on the Amiga version, and for this you can use either the keyboard or you can use a parallel port adapter that provides 2 additional joystick ports. And rounding out these amazing releases is Devil's Temple, Son of the Kung Fu Master. This is the most recent release in 2022, and it's a spin-off of 1984's Kung Fu Master by Irem. This was one of the original arcade brawlers, and it's a classic. Kung Fu Master was ported to a few consoles and home computers back in the day, and perhaps the most popular is Kung Fu on the NES. The Amiga never saw a port of Kung Fu Master, and Devil's Temple fills that void rather nicely, with some excellent gameplay, and it feels very faithful to the original arcade. But it's also much more ambitious and larger than the original. It features 10 stages, 3 bonus stages, weapon pickups, Easter eggs, and runs on all Amigas with 1 mega RAM. Like Rygar, it supports 2-button joysticks, and it also has enhanced graphics if you run the game on an AGA Amiga. Devil's Temple is not a straight port, of course, but I think this was the right move, as the game has its own charm and amazingly hand-drawn pixel art with smooth animation and scrolling that the Amiga is known for. The physical version of the game comes with 4 floppy disks, a CD32 version, and a full color manual. There's also digital download versions, of course, that support WHD load, CD32 ADF files, and hard drive installable versions of the game. In short, Devil's Temple is absolutely amazing, and one that I recommend if you're a fan of brawlers as well as the Amiga. It's one of the very best Amiga games that I've played in a very long time. And as soon as I saw that a physical version was available, I jumped down and purchased it immediately. Now, a few more things that I want to talk about with these games. The first one is if you're interested in learning about the development process of how these games were made, then check out Graham's YouTube channel. He basically goes comprehensively through each of the games and has what's pretty much a development diary of many of the games that we saw on this episode today. So if you want to learn more about how these games were made on the Amiga, he basically goes through the entire process for you, and it's a very invaluable resource. And I'll leave a link to his channel in the description below. Now, I also want to mention that if you are interested in picking up these games for yourself, then don't hesitate to pre-order them off Graham's website. I'll leave a link to that in the description below. Now, full transparency, I ended up buying Devil's Temple myself with my own money, and Graham ended up sending me copies of the other 3 releases. But you want to make sure, if you are interested in purchasing these games, then do so quickly because supplies are extremely limited. But I hope you enjoyed this look at these modern Amiga games in 2022. I think they're absolutely incredible, and I'm very much looking forward to seeing what's next. There's so many old arcade games that could be brought back to the Amiga, or could be brought to the Amiga for the first time, that didn't receive ports, or maybe the ports themselves were substandard. And we've got a really great development studio here with Giza Games making these fascinating and amazing releases for the Amiga. And I can't wait to see what's next from Giza Games. I'm very much looking forward to 2023 and beyond. But we are going to leave it here for today's episode, guys. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this episode, please don't forget to leave me a thumbs up, and I'll catch you guys in the next video. Bye for now.